Government wanted to do something about that, and so they supported Care After Combat initially just as a scoping exercise, really, to see if there was any way we could help these men and women actually, understand the problems that led to offending behaviour and go on to lead successful lives.
So what sort of offending behaviour are we talking typically for people that's in prison that's actually served in our armed forces?
Primarily, it's violence.
Yeah.
So that is the highest offence that we work with.
Okay.
But of course, the military, as with everybody else, it's the full range of offending behaviour.
OK, so we're in a pub, Jane, Dr Jane, and I guess for some people, the odd tip of alcohol is good, a bit of fun of a weekend, relax, let your hair down. But for some people, alcohol is not always their best friend, and I guess that plays a part in some of your veterans that end up inside.
Absolutely. So, speaking from my own experience, a good 2/3 of the people I work with have some kind of mental health problem or mental health difficulty, struggling to either adapt into civilian life or with some of the traumas they've experienced during service. People might self-medicate with alcohol to manage some of those thoughts and feelings.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. The Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening. Prince Harry arrives from the west coast of America but doesn't stay very long. The role rapprochement appears not to have happened. I have got for you tonight the Rwanda files. Yes, I have seen private documents from inside the Home Office last year that show at the very moment Rishi Sunak was telling us he would stop the boats, the Home Office knew that he wouldn't and he couldn't. Why is the Prime Minister seeking to deceive us? PopCon, yes, Liz Truss launched it today. I was there. I'll give you my opinion. And a Stasi-style investigation into a Newcastle United football fan. Her political views are unacceptable and she's been banned from watching the team she loves. She and Toby Young from the Free Speech Union join me in the studio and we ask, what on earth are the Premier League up to? But before all of that, in a very packed show, let's get the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Nigel, thank you, and good evening to you. Well, the top story from the GB newsroom tonight is that the King has arrived at the Sandringham estate in Norfolk, having left London this afternoon. King Charles and Queen Camilla both on the helicopter that left Buckingham Palace earlier today after meeting Prince Harry at Clarence House, who'd just flown in from LA. The Duke of Sussex spending around 30 to 45 minutes with his father. And it became apparent today that Prince William, he says, has no plans to meet his brother whilst Harry is in the UK. We understand the King personally told both his sons about his cancer diagnosis before Buckingham Palace made that announcement publicly last night. Palace officials hoping the King's openness about the news will help others whose lives have been affected by cancer. Now, also in the news today, more precise details have been released about the last known movements of chemical attack suspect Abdul Azadi before he went on the run. The Met Police said today the former asylum seeker walked past the Unilever building near Blackfriars, then headed towards Victoria Embankment in central London, about a mile away. A £20,000 reward still being offered to anyone with any information that leads to his arrest. He's suspected of attacking a woman with a corrosive substance, which could mean she has life-changing injuries. In the United States, a court has ruled that Donald Trump is not immune to charges that he plotted to overturn the 2020 US election. That means the former president is now one step away from a criminal trial, a move which would be unprecedented in American political history. His lawyers had argued that former presidents can't be prosecuted for official actions, but a panel of judges has now disagreed. Mr Trump is likely to appeal. If he were to win the next election, he could seek to pardon himself. Here, Liz Truss says democracy has become unpopular as she unveiled a new group aimed at boosting conservative values. The Popular Conservatives Movement, or PopCon, aims to take on what the former Prime Minister called left-wing extremists. The Lib Dems accuse some of those present today at the launch of economic vandalism, but Ms Truss told GB News she thinks left-wing ideas have gone too far. And a 46-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of malicious communications following reports of an abusive and threatening phone call to a Conservative MP's London office. Mike Freer announced his decision to quit politics last week, telling GB News he feared for his safety. The Justice Minister has been the target of several death threats, as well as an arson attack on his Finchley and Golders Green constituency office. And finally, some political news to really sink your teeth into. A set of dentures once worn by Winston Churchill is up for auction. The false teeth were worn by the former Prime Minister during many of his most famous speeches and were designed, we're told, to protect his natural lisp. They go under the hammer in Cheltenham with an expected price of around £8,000 on the ticket. If you'd like to sign up for the latest GB News alerts, do scan the QR code on your screen right now or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good evening. Well, Prince Harry did come very quickly from the west coast of America, landed at Heathrow, made his way to the palace, but it would appear he wasn't really there for very long before the King headed off to Sandringham. To get the full details, we're joined by Cameron Walker, GB News' royal correspondent outside Buckingham Palace. Cameron, it would appear it was a very, very short visit, and then the King left.
Yeah, surprisingly short visit, Nigel. It was a very busy day here in central London. Prince Harry landed at Heathrow Airport around lunchtime. He was very quickly whisked off to the VIP Windsor suite, where he was put into a black SUV with a police escort and driven to central London. He arrived at Clarence House at 2:42 p.m. and then, as you say, spent a very short amount of time with the King, only 45 minutes. And bearing in mind he's just been on an 11-hour flight to spend time with his father, who has been diagnosed with cancer, I think to most people it appears to be very short indeed. And then, as you say, he left Clarence House, and the King left Clarence House shortly after, accompanied by the Queen, and then flew in a helicopter from the Buckingham Palace garden to Sandringham. No word on where exactly Prince Harry has gone, but as for Prince William, a source close to him has told me that there are no plans at all for Prince William and Prince Harry to meet, which suggests to me that their relationship is still incredibly rocky. Yes, the King did meet with his youngest son, which suggests there is some kind of olive branch, there is some kind of bond between them. But again, a big question. It was a very, very short meeting indeed. The Prince of Wales, as I said, have no plans. But another big question is, where's Prince Harry staying tonight? He was evicted from Frogmore Cottage by the Crown Estate following his memoir being released, Spare. And there's no obvious royal residence, official royal residence for him left in the UK. So has he got an official invite from a member of the royal family to stay with them? No details yet.
Cameron, thank you very much indeed. I mean, it could be, folks, that maybe he's gone straight back to Heathrow Airport. I don't know. Well, I'm joined by Tom Bower, royal biographer, journalist and sharp-eyed observer of these matters. Quite extraordinary, isn't it?
Well, I was always suspicious. I mean, yesterday when it was all announced, I immediately said that I just didn't believe there was reconciliation on the way. And I really think it was Harry looking for a sort of self-promotion, a junket to somehow raise his profile.
That's a very cynical thing to say.
I'm a cynic and a realist. I don't think Harry ever thought he was going to have reconciliation here because you have to beg for forgiveness. I don't even believe he met the Queen. I'm sure that Queen Camilla stayed well out of the way, having absorbed the most dreadful insults from Harry in his book, she being, according to Harry, a vicious person. And, of course, William didn't want to meet, or Kate wanted to meet Harry. So I wouldn't be surprised if he was on his way back, if not tonight, then tomorrow. I think he's got enough place where he could stay. There's enough rooms in Clarence House and Buckingham Palace where they'll just give him a sleeping bag where he can keep down.
Sleeping bag. What an image. I think, you know, we were saying last night that family crises can bring people back together who've had fallouts, who appear to be irreconcilable. But as you say, for forgiveness to come from the Queen and from William and Kate, he needs to apologise, doesn't he?
Well, he'd have to more than apologise. I mean, he has really been the source of the most dreadful lies and the most dreadful treachery and disloyalty. So the idea, and for money, I mean, he did it all for money. And for someone who then, only 2 weeks ago, went to Jamaica and rattled a lot of old skeletons there and failed to offer his father any good wishes when the prostate diagnosis was first made, which is 2 weeks ago.
Yep.
So I was always suspicious about this quick dash across the Atlantic. It was all about Harry wanting to position himself. And always remember one thing, that his wife, the blessed Meghan, is a person who gives no quarter in reconciliation. Her father is lying ill in Mexico. She wouldn't dream of going and saying to him, let's make up.
That is a very...
And there's no way that Harry is going to disobey the Duchess.
No, when it comes to Meghan, as you say, with her father, you can see a pattern of behaviour here, and I understand that. Tom, talking about the King, I mean, obviously he goes in for a relatively routine prostate enlargement procedure of some kind. We don't know exactly what it was. And something else gets discovered. What interested me was the openness with which he talked about the prostate. I did say on this show, do we really need to know these details? I was, oh, Nigel, really? Don't be so old-fashioned. Actually, the King saying this makes it very helpful, encourages other men with problems to come forward. And I bought into that. But that statement last night actually left us, I thought, with more questions than answers. We don't know what cancer it is. We don't know what stage it's at, although the Prime Minister this morning sort of hinting it might have been called at early stage. We don't even know what treatment he's having. And then today we see him leaving London in a helicopter, heading up to Sandringham. Have you got any idea what's going on?
Well, I think what's going on is that the King, I'm speculating, but the King is a great fan, is always promoter of alternative medicine. He would not be one for chemotherapy. He's always argued against it. He's a great believer in natural herbs and potions and things like that. So my guess is that at the moment he's taking advice from a man called Michael Dixon, who he's championed for many years, who headed his own, the King's Natural Alternative Medicine Institute, discredited by many people, but the King is a great believer in it. And I was always, last night, I was very surprised that people kept on saying, well, he's going to have chemotherapy or radiation or the rest of it. You know, he doesn't believe in it. He does not believe in it. It's a risk. I find it's a risk. And I think going to Sandringham is where he wants to take these alternative medicines in a quiet way.
Interesting line of thought. And do you agree with me that at some point he's going to have to say more?
I think he is, but I think he had no alternative but to disclose that he had a problem because he would, A, disappeared, and B, he was in hospital. It would have leaked. Someone would have sold it to a newspaper.
Yeah, and a cancellation of public engagement. No, I get that. The point I'm making is, having been so open initially about what the problem was, now we know it's cancer and that's all we know. Don't you think that the sort of just speculation is going to reach a level over the next few days where they have to tell us more?
No, I don't actually, because we don't speculate anymore what Kate, the Princess of Wales, had or has. It dies down. It dies down, and rightly so. I mean, there are many people who know what Kate has had, and one leaves it at that. There's no reason to broadcast it. And the same with the King. One just hopes that he recovers pretty speedily. I'm just worried that alternative medicine won't provide the cure which conventional medicine would do.
No, well, that's going to be that aspect's going to be very, as you say, he's been a very keen advocate of this for decades. That's going to be very interesting. And Tom, it's rotten luck, isn't it? I mean, the bloke waits 70 years.
Absolutely.
And we're 18 months in or whatever we are.
It's worse than that. I mean, it's a crossroads for the monarchy. I mean, here was a man who, with all his foibles and all the rest of it, actually could have contributed, and might still well contribute, we hope, to a new era and a transition. But he's at a crossroads. He's not only got the problem of the family breakup, but also his health. And it's very hard for him to impose his views, not only in England, but in the Commonwealth. I mean, his trips to Canada and New Zealand and Australia were critical to shoring up the monarchy, which is, in the end, Britain's soft power abroad. He's not there. And that is a major problem for Britain and for him. One just hopes he can recover quickly. But, you know, the truth is that he is an older man. His wife does not like travelling. She suffers a lot from jet lag. Her own health is not perfect. So altogether, we're putting more and more onto Kate and William to make sure that monarchy survives.
I mean, we've been talking for years about a slimmed-down monarchy. Boy, we've got it now, haven't we? Andrew not involved. The Sussex is gone. Princess Anne getting on in years. I mean, we're down to very few people.
Well, we've got enough. But, you know, the monarchy, I think we have. And the point is that Britain, on the whole, the vast majority of Britons want a monarchy. So whether they get the opening of the hall by a member of the royal family or not, I think, by the way, there'll be enough, and thank goodness there's enough. And, of course, Kate and William are the greatest ambassadors for Britain and the monarchy there is. So I think we should be optimistic. We just hope the King recovers and takes proper medical advice.
Well, as I say, that point's going to be very
interesting. And we can bid farewell to Harry.
Well, it looks like it. No, it looks like it. A final thought, Tom. You know, it was a very difficult job to come to the throne after I mean, extraordinary. 70 years, no scandals, no problems. I mean, she did an amazing job, and we all know that. How's he done so far?
Well, I think he's been OK. I think he was given a very difficult task, and he has not, as it is, imposed himself on us, because to follow the Queen was pretty difficult, if not impossible. Yeah. But I think now it's hampered him, and I think that the foreign trips and various things which he could have done were now going to be delayed, and I think that's, for his point of view, is a tragedy, because he really did want to bring in a whole new era. And that is now a question mark.
Yeah, and bad news for the Commonwealth as well.
Absolutely.
Tom Bower, thank you very much indeed. Well, some interesting thoughts there from Tom. We'll find out more about alternative medicines and therapies, no doubt, over the next weeks and months. In a moment, I will tell you what the Home Office was saying internally at the same time the Prime Minister was telling us he'd stop the boats. And PopCon, yes, Liz Truss launches it today. What does it all mean? All of that in just a moment.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
So the highway code was amended recently. Passed me by, but anyway, a new poll suggests this has made no difference to the safety of road users, and I could believe that.
Yeah, there was an awful crash in London, wasn't there? A bus and a pedestrian yesterday.
Fatality.
So we're asking, is the highway code fit for purpose, or should we just scrap it altogether? That's our debate this morning, and we're joined by Danny Kelly. She argues highways are not fit for purpose, and cycling instructor Anna Hughes thinks they are. Good morning to you both.
You see, Anna, I think it's a good thing. I think the highway code is a good thing. I just don't think that any of us pay any attention to it, or we should all be tested on it quite regularly, I would have thought. We should have revision courses in it.
Yeah, I think you just summed it up, Eamon, by saying the changes passed you by. I actually asked a few of my fellow cyclists and pedestrians, what is classified as vulnerable road users, about this very thing. I said, has the new highway code made things safer for you? And most people said, not at all. Drivers don't know what it is. They don't know what the changes are. They probably don't know what the rules are to start with. And as you've just said, doing refreshers is a really good idea. It's a bit bizarre that we're given a license to operate this quite dangerous machinery, and then we're never tested again, and especially not on the highway code, which is, especially when it changes, why wouldn't we be retested on that or have to do refresher courses on it? You know, there are conflicts on the road, there are fatalities. It makes sense to be aware of what the highway code says, because it is there to keep us safe.
Yeah, Danny Kelly, when I think back, I think it was 1999 I passed my driving test. Hardly any bikes on the road then, to be honest, probably virtually none.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Well, there's no doubting in my mind the sincerity of Liz Truss. It may well have been a very, very short premiership. It may have ended very badly, but she is prepared to stand up and fight for the ideas she believes in. Here she was, earlier on today, launching PopCon. Yes, popular conservatism.
One of the problems we have is, though we've got a Conservative government, what we're seeing in our schools, in our universities, in our corporate sector is the spreading of wokery, of left-wing ideas. The people of Britain want us to deal with the real issues. Immigration's too high, the government's too big, taxes are too high. But what we constantly hear is the left. So PopCon is about challenging that. It's about challenging the left-wing orthodoxy and making it positive to be a Conservative.
Well, Liz Truss was talking there to Christopher Hope, GB News' political editor. I mean, she was very upbeat and she had a big audience of a few hundred people.
Including you?
No, we're going to come back to me in a moment. Me being there, I mean, it really did cause a bit of a stir. I agree with a lot of what she said and what Jacob Rees-Mogg said. They talked about the fact that power had gone from Parliament to judges to quangos. I fully understood all of that. But what is PopCon? What's it going to do?
Yes, it wasn't the damn squib we all thought it might be. For me, it felt like it was Tories on the right of the party trying to get the centre to listen to them. They've lost to Ella Braben from the top drawer of the government. They've got Esther McVeigh, maybe Lee Rowley, who's he, housing minister. Yeah. But really, who else can they look towards? So, as ever with the Tory party, if no one's listening to them, they form a group and start shouting loudly. That's what PopCon is. But also, what's interesting about it is a grassroots idea. They're talking to PPCs, protective candidates for the next election. They spoke from the stage. Someone called Mari Fraser, I think it was, gave a good speech.
But it wasn't very clear to me. I mean, were they asking candidates to sign a pledge?
No.
It wasn't very clear.
There's a book out in June.
I mean, there was no call to action.
There was no call, because they're not sure what to call for. Afterwards, I can reveal to you, 70 people gathered for private drinks at Jacob Rees-Mogg's house, 30 Tory MPs, 3 times the number who were in the hall with us.
10 MPs were all that was there.
But 30 there behind the closed doors. He raised lots of money for this group. What will it do with the money? For me, it's all about the future, and probably the future after the election. I looked around in the cheap seats where we were, Nigel. I saw David Canzini, a former aide to Boris Johnson. He's been involved with Tory politics for 30 years. I saw John Strafford, a guy who's redrafting the Tory constitution. I saw donors, Lord Michael Ashcroft, you know him very well, Nick Candy, we'll come on to him in a minute. I saw people there who can actually support and relaunch a broken Tory party. And I wonder whether that was what we're looking at. This is the beginning of the planning for the post-election Tory party.
I was there partly with my GB News hat on, but I was also there because I'm interested in ideas. I genuinely am. That's why I left the Conservative Party all those years ago and joined UKIP. Also, I was there because, well, there was quite a bit of nuisance value, I suppose, in me turning up. What Chris Hope just said is right. This wasn't about what happens before the next election. It was about what happens after the next election. And some Conservatives have great fears for the future. Here was Tobias Ellwood talking to GB News this afternoon.
These right-wing Tories, they look at their government, they don't really recognise many people from their persuasion in it, so they've formed the PopCons to do that for them.
Yeah, and this is the problem of where we're heading, is because I can tell you the message, build on your hate, and that can rile you up, get your anger going, and then you'll vote for me. But is it going to take the country anywhere? No, it won't. We've seen that in other parts of the world. We don't want that to happen here. What we'll see is our party fragment between the light blue and the dark blue. Worst case scenario, we'll see Nigel Farage ending up as leader of our party, because our base will like that.
Well, some great interviews there today. But of course, there is thought, isn't there, that reform. I mean, basically, what they said from the platform today, I mean, albeit immigration barely got mentioned, but what they said in their pamphlet said to me, well, if I believed in those things, I'd vote reform at the next election. So there is this discussion, isn't there?
And probably Tory, because those ideas were really what Rishi Sunak, were he in the audience, believed in. That interview with Tobias Ellwood, he said his idea is to just take away the choice of the next leader from the grassroots. Give all of the MPs, and that's what I thought was extraordinary.
God help us. If they had a say, we might get Nigel Farage as leader. I mean, I hate these people. They don't wash off it enough. I mean,
he's not a hating man, but he didn't.
The arrogance.
They don't want you as their leader. They don't want.
But they don't want their own grassroots to have an opinion. I was in Iowa, Chris, the other week, where the grassroots voted for Donald Trump, even though the Republican Party in Iowa wanted Ron DeSantis. He's kind of saying that shouldn't happen here.
Well, the event was all, I think, about delivering back to 2016. That was about moving power from Brussels to London, giving power to MPs and officials. If they want to mess it up, that's on them. Bring a new lot in. And Brexit, in that sense, was a neutral idea, like the weather. It rains, it pours, put a coat on or not. Don't blame Brexit for people's foibles and failure to deliver on what the promise was.
Now, lots of great interviews that you did today, Chris Hope, but one was a real surprise. Now, she was a pop singer, a model. I mean, Holly Valance was an incredibly famous person.
A star of Neighbours. I mean, I grew up watching Neighbours.
Yeah, and had singles and all the rest of it. And I know Holly, and she's become an incredibly private person. I don't think she's done any media interviews for years, and yet...
Yes, my charm must have won her over, Nigel Farage.
Well, let's have a look at Holly Valance talking to Chris Hope earlier on.
PopCon, and with me now is Holly Candy, who viewers might remember as Holly Valance from Neighbours, and a pop star too. Holly, we're here to this PopCon launch. Why are you here?
I actually got it mixed up. I thought it was a pop music convention. No, I'm a citizen like everyone else here who's concerned about the way things are going in the country. Many things worry and bother me with two little children to bring up and what they might inherit. So I want to come and listen to ideas, good ideas.
Well, well done you for getting her to speak.
Well, yeah, and there's more on GB News website and the Twitter account. She said that she is struck by the insanity of net zero regulations imposing themselves on people's lives. She backed our colleague on GB News, Jacob Rees-Mogg, to be Prime Minister, not you, Nigel Farage. Sorry about that. She also just said, maybe jokingly a bit, everyone starts as a lefty and they grow up and they forget about all that, whatever it is. Maybe as a joke, I think. I think it was interesting to hear her speak and interesting to get a new voice in politics.
Yeah, gbnews.com for the full Holly Valance interview. One last final thought. Piece of polling out about an hour and a half ago from YouGov, asking 2019 Conservative voters, the people that gave them an 80-seat majority, what their biggest priorities were, and immigration was now 20% higher than the economy.
Because they can't control the borders. Why can't they? That's net migration. Why are they allowing so many to come in to overwhelm some communities in this country? And why can't they deal with the 30,000 or so who are arriving here legally and being put up in hotels? It's a problem. I do think, Rishi Sunak tells us he gets it.
Yeah.
He wants to get these flights off. He's hoping it might work. That's all he's got. We'll hear more on Monday, by the way.
Absolutely.
I've got to say, he's facing our viewers, our listeners, unedited.
I want to remind you all that next Monday, live at 8 p.m, the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, will take part in a special People's Forum here live on GB News. And over the course of the hour, he's going to take questions directly from you, the great British public. Now, if you want to be there, you know what to do. gbnews.com/PM. gbnews.com/PM. It's going to be held up somewhere in the northeast of England. I suspect it'll be very heavily oversubscribed.
Yes, and I should say we have no idea it'll be a very dangerous time for the PM. 1 hour of unfiltered questions. Anything could happen. Yeah. You must tune in and go if you can.
Well, I'll tell you what, good for him, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, let's say something nice about him.
Yeah, to his credit.
Good for him.
Absolutely.
For turning up and doing it. In a moment, I'm going to show you part one of the Rwanda files, what was really happening inside the Home Office, what the truth was. And I want to ask a question. I'm going to ask senior Conservative Sir John Hayes, why did the Conservative Prime Minister willfully mislead the British public? It's a serious charge.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Patrick Christie's Tonight. Weekdays from 9 p.m.
Ken, do you find the Union flag, the Union Jack, divisive?
In some situation, but as Simon quite clearly stated, and I agree with everything that he says in regards that there's situation when people use it for ulterior motive to cause fear, alarm and distress. We saw that with the far right when they came up to saying protecting the Churchill statues and things of that nature. But largely on the large whole, even I wave the St. George's flag on a sporting occasion. And I don't see anything wrong in raising the Union Jack or the St. George's flag so long as the intention is correct. And as he says, Mr. Brockhurst, he served for the country and he should have every right to be proud of what he's done and the way that he wants to display it.
All right, Simon, what do you make of this kind of, I would argue it as like student social media-based politics, where you get these pillocks from the Green Party or whatever saying, oh, it's divisive and I can't believe it. It will be legal in this country to do... Do those people need to get out more? I was on the streets of Stratford earlier on, an incredibly diverse place, speaking to a massive range of people right across different age demographics. I couldn't find a single sausage who said to me that they thought that this guy from the Green Party was right.
He obviously has absolutely no attention from anybody, and this is his way of finding attention. Both Ken and myself, we both agree that nobody should use any symbol of national identity to offend others deliberately, because that's just inflaming a situation. There's so much sensitivity around so many things today, and people do get offended by so much so quickly without any rhyme or reason.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Well, that YouGov poll that we saw within the last hour and a half is no surprise. This is becoming the biggest issue in the country. The massive explosion in the population is damaging the quality of life of virtually everyone living in this country. Yes, I really mean that. But what angers people even more is that visual imagery of the traffickers putting people on those small boats, crossing the channel. 91% of those that come are males, 78% that come are young males. I have filmed for GB News them throwing their iPhones, their passports into the English Channel. We've no idea who's coming into the country, and I believe it poses a national security risk. Now, the Prime Minister obviously knows this as well, which is why on the 7th of March last year, he said this.
That is why today we're introducing legislation to make clear that if you come here illegally, you can't claim asylum, you can't benefit from our modern slavery protections, you can't make spurious human rights claims, and you can't stay. We will detain those who come here illegally and then remove them in weeks, either to their own country, if it is safe to do so, or to a safe third country like Rwanda.
Dead simple. You cross the English Channel by boat, we will detain you. And shortly thereafter, we will deport you. You will not be able to stay. It was perhaps his Tony Abbott moment, because that's pretty much what the Australian Prime Minister said all those years ago. Difference was, Tony Abbott meant it. I don't believe the Prime Minister did, and here's why. I've had sight of an internal Home Office document from pretty much the same time. I'm going to call it the Rwanda Files. I'm going to give you the details of this over the course of the next few days. But this is what the internal Home Office report tells us. It tells us that the United Kingdom's detention capacity is limited to just 1,000 beds. There's the Prime Minister saying he will be detained. Actually, on the busiest days a couple of summers ago, more than 1,000 a day were coming. So he might have been able to detain 1 day's worth, yet he told us that everybody would be detained. That just 12% of illegal arrivals would be removed each year in, and I quote the Home Office document, the best case scenario. Prime Minister, at exactly the same time, telling us you won't be able to stay. And here's the really big one, I think, that a maximum of 500 deportations could happen to Rwanda in the first year. A maximum of 500 deportations, despite the impression that was given. Now, to be fair, they did estimate that could rise as high as 3,000 in years 2 and 3. But if you just look at those 3 basic facts that we've revealed from the Rwanda files, this is the information that ministers were being given. This was the truth of the situation we were in, and yet the Prime Minister stood up there. I find it impossible, literally impossible, to believe that he or those that were briefing him did not know this information. And yet he stands up and makes a pledge that you will be detained and you will be deported. I think the kindest way I can put this is that he willfully deceived the nation. Other people might use stronger words. And that is why, above all, on this and the legal numbers of people coming to Britain, that support for the Conservative Party is now sinking beneath the waves. Manifesto after manifesto since 2010 promising that they'd reduce legal migration. Well, I'm joined by Sir John Hayes, Conservative Member of Parliament for South Holland and Medeepings, former Transport Secretary. John, as I say, these are official Home Office documents. They lay out very clearly the limits of our capability. These aren't political points. These are simple numerical points of what the position was. And yet the Prime Minister, and actually the Prime Minister before him, keep promising they'll stop the boats, but they won't, will they?
Well, the biggest existential crisis facing this country, as you've implied, Nigel, is mass migration.
Yep.
And the reason for that is the pressure it places on public resources, but also on the difference it makes to the character of the nation. Communities being altered, people having to compete for jobs and for houses, road infrastructure unable to cope with the additional numbers. People talk about access to GPs. Last year, there were hundreds of thousands of new GP registrations due to population growth, your words, due to mass migration. So let's be clear. You and I believe, and most of the British people believe, that has to stop. You're right, it's about legal migration, because leaving aside the boats, and I'm coming back to that, I'm not avoiding your question, legal migration, as you know, over 2 years, 1.4 million. You can't grow a population at that pace. It's impossible to accommodate that number of additional people due to migration.
Yeah, and the demographic change of the country, the reshaping of communities, the cultural change is enormous. What about the boats?
So on the boats, I think you're right. The imagery of the boats, although the numbers, of course, are much smaller than legal migrants, the imagery is people breaching our borders with impunity. Now, you and I campaigned to take back control. You'll remember the words very clearly.
We did.
The British people backed you and I in taking back control. And if you can't control your borders, what can you control? So we have to stop the boats. Rishi's right. The best way of doing that is to emulate the Australians. The Australian system was called Operation Sovereign Borders. You know that very well. What they did was to process people offshore. That acts as a deterrent to people coming. Now, on the numbers, I haven't seen the documents, so I can't comment on those, of course. But what I will say is this. that once people start being sent to Rwanda, my estimate is, and the government's too, they won't come.
But John, no one's going to Rwanda. We're signed up to the European Convention on Human Rights. That judge stopped that plane from going. We've incorporated the European Court of the ECHR, the Convention, into British law, you know, within the Human Rights Act 1998, and the British judges love it. There are no planes going to Rwanda, are there?
Not yet.
There won't be.
But the bill that we just passed, not as strong as it should have been, Nigel. Not as strong as it should have been, and I tried to make it stronger, as you well know.
Do you still really believe it's going to happen?
I think it will happen. My fear is, and I suspect it's your fear too, not enough numbers. So if planes fly, but the numbers crossing is greater than the number leaving, then that clearly will mean the policy hasn't worked. What I hope we can do is what the Australians did. Just broadcast a message to those people who are setting off, you won't stay in Britain, you'll be sent to Africa.
And if not, why should we vote Conservative at the next election?
I think you're right that immigration is a key sailing to the next election. Okay.
Why should we vote Conservative if they don't deal with this?
If they don't deliver on immigration, then the government will be found wanting. Now, those of us, I hope, that have stood out and made exactly the argument you've made, will be able to go to the electorate and say, we fought hard to make this happen.
Well, some of you might survive, yes.
Well, I'm only speaking for myself.
Yeah,
this is what I've argued throughout, and I've been very consistent and very clear about it.
I get your position. It's your parties I've got the problem with. Thank you for joining me. Now, the What the Farage moment. In Ireland yesterday, a demonstration against mass migration. 10,000 people gathering in Dublin, and among many that spoke to them was Herman Kelly, leader of the Irish Freedom Party, who just happens to have been my former press officer in Brussels. But have a look at the atmosphere in Dublin yesterday.
The number of people who were protesting, people who have a burning desire for the freedom of their country and the safety of their community. He's a member of the Irish Freedom Party, and he was explaining he's from Leixlip, his family are from Leixlip, going through generations, and he explained to the camera why he was there, making a stand against the colonisation of his local community.
It's happening, and Herman's words, the colonisation, well, he's not wrong, is he? And pro rata, legal immigration into Ireland is even higher than it is in this country. Now a happy story. 102-year-old Jack Hemmings, a World War II bomber pilot and one that won the Air Force Cross, yesterday became the oldest man to go up in a two-seater Spitfire and take the controls. Let's have a look.
It's absolutely delightful. Very bumpy, very bumpy. To be honest, it felt a bit rusty. Not surprising, as I am rusty.
And just finally, Jack, how are you going to celebrate a mark today? What are you going to do now?
No, I hadn't thought as far as that, but I dare say a bit of a beverage of some sort might come in.
World War II generation. They enjoyed a beverage during the war. They enjoyed a beverage after the war. There aren't many of them left, and I hope that Jack Hemmings enjoyed it. And you can see some footage here of him in the back of the Spit, taking the controls. And actually, there we are. They're turning over completely. Fabulous, lovely, happy story. And, you know, we reflect as the 80th anniversary of D-Day is just ahead of us in a few weeks' time, that there are now so few of that generation left with us that we'll do our best on this channel to honour all of them. I promise you, we will. Now, in response to my comments about the Home Office and what they knew, this is their response to the Rwanda Files Part 1. The government and Rwanda are committed to delivering on our partnership and ensuring flights take off as soon as possible. The Rwanda scheme is uncapped. The number of people who will be removed to Rwanda will depend on a range of factors. We do not comment on unverified, leaked documents. No, I bet you don't, when they very clearly say that 500 would be the maximum in year one. Now, after the break, a truly astonishing and I think really deeply worrying story where a gender-critical Newcastle fan has been followed by a Stasi-like Premier League investigation and banned from going to watch her beloved football club. This is something that Toby Young of the Free Speech Union has brought into the public domain, and this will be Lindsay Smith's first interview on national television on this subject. What the hell are the Premier League up to?
On Patrick Christie's tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, a big exclusive on the Muslim vote, a new movement set to send shockwaves through the next general election. Another exclusive for you on the BBC wasting your money whilst they prosecute people over the licence fee. I've investigated the role of the Church of England in bogus asylum claims. Nigel Farage joins me for the latest immigration madness. And King Charles has cancer. But should he abdicate? David Starkey on that. Patrick Christie tonight, 9 to 11 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Martin Daubney. Weekdays from 3 p.m.
Or they're trying to make it better, or they're trying to make it slower, a lot slower. Slower enough, in fact, for it to sufficiently allow the boats to start coming in to cause further political damage to Rishi Sunak.
Which it will do if it carries on.
Of course it will. And this is the Labour peers, the Lib Dem peers, and no doubt some of the Conservative wets, banding together, causing political damage to Rishi Sunak. And the longer it goes on, the worse it will be for the Conservative Party.
There's now a deadline on the Rwanda plan. It's got to start working this summer to have any electoral benefit for Rishi Sunak, because of course if the election is in November, by then the crossings will slow down. It's got to be up and running by about May or June, and then they'll take it from there.
Cool. And you have a crumb of comfort for us. Rishi Sunak met a Prime Minister.
Well, a crumb of comfort for those who want to stop the boat, certainly, or we'll get towards it. The PM today met Alexander De Croo, who's a Belgian Prime Minister. They've agreed a UK-Belgium law enforcement cooperation agreement. In short, that is a focus on surveillance and information, ultimately, which should help stop the boats. Not many boats make crossings from Belgium, but it's the kind of, they can hopefully use law enforcement. These are the kind of deals which Sir Keir Starmer's talking about. If he becomes Prime Minister, he'll do more of these deals with countries on the continent, and this shows that the PM, the Tory PM, can do them too.
And there may be intelligence sharing of crime gangs that operate within Belgium. As you say, it's a much, much further distance, much more perilous across the North Sea. Very unlikely that people will be leaving in any great numbers from Belgium. But nevertheless, is this of note, or is it a token victory against the backdrop of domestic loss?
It's interesting they could do it with Belgium and not do it with the European Union, because so far we've been told the returns agreements can't be agreed with individual countries because they've got the European Union to talk to. Maybe this deal can be mirrored with France, and that might help with better cooperation, because basically after Brexit we're a sovereign country. We have to work on some areas more closely with our European neighbours.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Well, Toby Young is the General Secretary of the Free Speech Union and somebody who we've worked with on this programme before, because we want to get out into the public some of the ridiculous things, some of the bad things that are happening in our country. This one, Toby, is totally astonishing. I mean, it would appear, and we know the Stamp Out Racism campaigns and all the things that have happened in football, which we would not disapprove of, but it would appear there's now almost like a Stasi-like team hunting down football supporters whose views don't match PC views.
Yeah, it is extraordinary. I don't think I've ever come across a case quite like this before, Nigel. It's probably the most egregious example of a private company interfering in free speech that the Free Speech Union has encountered so far. I was alerted to Lindsay's case by Harry Miller, the ex-copper who's become a free speech warrior. Yes. When he heard about her case, he thought, this is one for the Free Speech Union. So Lindsay has been banned by Newcastle United, banned from attending games until 2026, not because she said anything racist, but because she said trans women aren't women. And she didn't say that to an employee of the club, to a player, to an official. She didn't even say it to another Newcastle United fan. She just said it on Twitter. And not only when someone complained about this did Newcastle United decide to open an investigation, they also asked the Premier League for help in investigating her. They said, you've got a shadowy surveillance unit embedded in the Premier League investigate this dangerous person. And they compiled a 14-page dossier on Lindsay containing information like where she walks her dog, what the church is called.
So this is surveillance?
It's surveillance. It's the Stadium Stasi. And when they passed this 14-page dossier, this dodgy dossier...
Which you can see on your screens right now.
Newcastle then passed it on to Northumbria Police. Northumbria Police then turned up at Lindsay's house and said, you better accompany us to the station where we can interview you under caution. If you don't, we'll arrest you and force you to come with us. They concluded after 2 hours, perhaps reluctantly, that she hadn't actually broken the law. It's not yet illegal to say that trans women aren't women. Maybe if Labour get elected, it will be, but it's not at the moment. And you would have thought that at that point, NUFC would have concluded, no case to answer, you know, nothing to investigate. But instead, they decided that she'd breached Newcastle United's diversity and inclusion policy and banned her for 2.5 seasons. It's absolutely outrageous, Nigel.
Lindsay Smith joins us here in the studio, a banned Newcastle United fan. You've done nothing wrong. You haven't broken the law. You've given an opinion. Tell me the funny thing about this. Just remind our viewers and listeners, Newcastle is 80% owned by Saudi Arabian money. Where, of course, actually, when it comes to gay rights and everything else, I mean, everything's banned. Lindsay, you clearly love the football club.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I've supported them my whole life, to be honest with you, Nigel. I remember it was my granddad that got me to love them. My dad was in the Air Force, so we moved around a lot when I was younger. And my granddad said, you support where you're from. And that was Newcastle United. So no matter where I lived in the country, it didn't matter. It didn't matter if I was down south. It didn't matter if I was living in Grimsby. They were my team.
So how do you feel when the police knock at your door and say you've done something awful and basically being accused of a hate crime? And that's really what happened to you, isn't it?
Yeah, the worst thing about it was, Nigel, is they were actually warned by Harry Miller, Fair Cop. Yeah. He sent them over a big list of information around his ruling, which should have made them stop in the tracks and realise it wasn't malicious communications. They had no reason to be bothering me. And instead of reading it, they decided to just sack it off and come to my house. So, and that was, I was about to sit down to my tea when they came to the door.
You must have been horrified.
It was terrifying. Yeah. Terrifying. I was shaking. I was sick to my stomach. I mean, I've never so much as had a warning off the police, if I'm honest. So to have 2 men turn up at my door threatening to arrest me was mortifying.
So the ban's in place. You know, we're well through the season now, but the ban's in place. Do you have any right of appeal?
I have appealed, and they've upheld it. So, we gave a very detailed appeal on the areas where they've breached their own policy with respect to the timing. So it says in their own complaint policy that they would let the person who's been complained about know within a reasonable amount of time. It took them nearly 4 months to tell me, and I only knew because I got an email telling me I was under police investigation for a hate crime. Do
you know, Lindsay, you're very brave for going public on this and sitting in this studio. It's not something that people necessarily relish doing. I wonder, Toby, how many other Lindsays there might be?
Well, I think she's not an isolated case. No. I fear that this unit, this surveillance unit that was set up by the Premier League, might have been investigating hundreds, possibly thousands of people's social media accounts, monitoring them for wrong things. Not racism, as you say. I don't think many of us would have a problem with that, but merely for disagreeing with progressive radical orthodoxy on subjects like trans rights. And we put a form on our website. Remember how much success you had with your subject access request?
Well, what
that revealed with Coots?
Well, what was interesting, Toby, was I came out publicly and said I'd been debanked, at which point thousands of other people came out and said because they didn't want to say it on their own. That's why what Lindsay's doing, and well done you, is actually very important. Because I think we're going to learn more, aren't we?
We put a form on our website, freespeechunion.org/SAR, SAR/. You can fill out a subject access request to ask your Premier League club and this Stadium Stasi unit in the Premier League if they've opened a file on you, because we think this is a deep problem. It's not an isolated case.
As you say, the SAR and the debanking was my saviour. Let's hope this will. I'm going to give the final word to you, Lindsay, and keep it clean. But have you got a message for the Premier League and for Newcastle United Football Club?
I think the biggest message I've got really is for them to just not do this to anybody else. They really need to look at what they're doing and understand that just because someone's saying something you don't agree with or it's going against the tide, it doesn't mean you're being hateful. Everybody has their own life experiences. Everyone's views are based on the life that they've lived. And to call me a bigot and call me everything I've been called and compare me to a racist just because I believe in the biology and the right to single-sex spaces for women, I find mind-blowing, if I'm honest.
I tell you what, you've got a future in public affairs if you want it. I don't know. Toby might employ you. Well done, you. Thank you for being brave and coming in and telling that story.
Thank you.
A truly horrifying story. Now, I've got to come back to PopCon this morning because there were some wonderful speakers on the stage this morning, including, yes, Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg. But there was a point he made that I really felt I ought to pick him up on. Here it was.
And if you don't believe me, don't look around this country, but look to France, look to Germany, look to Brussels, look to Holland, look to the United States, look to Argentina. Voters have had enough, and they are saying, up with this, I will not put. And what answers do they get?
So, Jacob Rees-Mogg, don't look to this country. It was as if we are of the Conservative Party. No other political party must ever be allowed to exist that can challenge us. It is our God-given divine right. You seem to have missed something. It struck me that the last polls I saw had Reform on 14% and the Tories on 20%. The populist revolution that's happening in Europe is happening here. And you know, none of you today felt you could even acknowledge it. And I found that very, very... I agree with so much of what you said, by the way, about the way Blair had taken the Supreme Court out of Parliament. But there seems to be... You seem to be blind to what's really going on.
I would say you've been fundamental to the popular revolt. That Brexit was so important and is why we're not having the protests that they're having in France and in Germany and in Belgium. But we have a first-past-the-post system. And that means there needs to be a party of the right and effectively a party of the left. And that if you split the vote, you find that you lose on your wing of politics. And the question is, you were saying earlier that you thought the Tory party would be smashed to smithereens and from that we would rebuild. I don't agree with you. I think the only way to rebuild is with and through the Tory party.
So you're asking me to vote. You're asking me to vote, or the viewers to vote, for a party that lied to us willfully at a general election, that have increased the size of a state, allowed all sorts of absurd infringements on free speech, that have allowed legal net migration to reach 750,000 a year, and we should vote for them again?
I think that we need to adopt the policies of PopCon that we were putting forward, which actually I don't think Rishi Sunak is averse to. I think the political atmosphere has changed fundamentally. That in 2010, the Equality Act was seen as being a good thing. It was very hard to oppose it. The Green Agenda. Now, they were all great. Jacob, we're out of time. They're all great ideas. All I will say to you is, I don't think you understand the anger at the Tories in the country. I do.
It's real. It's real. It's real.
And we do have to do better.
We do.
We need to reunite our wing of
We've got to go. It's time for the weather. Jacob and I will talk on.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening. Welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. I'm Alex Deakin. Tonight, some snowy weather across northern Scotland and some rain across the south. That'll slowly be clearing by dawn from this weather front that's pushing its way steadily southwards. A set of weather fronts, really, and it's introducing the colder air further north. It's been very windy and snowy across Shetland today. The snow showers easing, the winds easing, but then more sleet and snow comes in across the Highlands and the Western Isles through the night. Could turn things pretty icy here as well. Further south, it'll be rain that sinks its way across South Wales and southern England, keeping the temperatures up here, but will still be a colder night than last night. Certainly colder further north with a fairly extensive frost from northern England northwards. That's why it could be icy. It could be a few flurries through the central belt, but that band of sleet and snow is tending to ease off as we go through the morning. More snow showers in northern Scotland through the day. The patchy rain in the south making for a grey start, but it should clear away. And for many, it's a dry and a bright day tomorrow, actually, with some decent spells of sunshine, but it is going to be cold, certainly colder than recent days in the south, with single digits as a high. And with the cold air in place and more wet weather pushing north on Thursday, a greater risk of some snow over Wales, northern parts of the Midlands, northern England and Northern Ireland. A lot on the hills, but even some at low
levels that could cause some disruption. Still a bit of uncertainty about the detail. Check out the latest warnings on the Met Office website.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Join me at 7